Good evening. King Henry VIII may have been one of the inspirations of several horror stories for children, stories to which mothers and grandmothers of a bygone age made reference when threatening children if they misbehaved. The story, in various local variations, includes a monstrous character who will be called upon to punish the children should they not obey. And indeed, it is natural to attribute to the ogre of the tale the features of Henry VIII as painted by Hans Holbein, executed in 1537 when the king was 46 years old, with those droopy cheeks, unhealthy obesity, and a sardonic, almost cruel expression. It is difficult looking at the picture to imagine that in his youth Henry was one of the most good-looking princes of Europe. When he was crowned at the age of 18, he was reported as being athletic, with brown red hair and a winning smile, they say. He was the opposite of his father, Henry VII, whom we saw at the end of the historical sketch on the War of the Roses. Henry VII was methodic and stingy. He personally kept his ledger book when he even wrote down the small sums which he had lost at gambling. Instead, Henry VIII was profligate, loved luxury, and was generous to the point of extravagance. His jerkins, studded with pearls and diamonds, were famous. His long socks of white silk, undershorts, and padded hoses, fashionable at the beginning of the 16th century, emphasized his legs, of which he was quite childishly proud. Now, he rode, he pulled the bow, he was skilled at tennis, played the lute, wrote poetry, and could be engaged in theological disputes. He spoke French, he spoke Latin, and in fact, at the beginning of Luther's Reformation, he even wrote a pamphlet rejecting Luther's theories. This gained him a commendation from the Pope and the title of Defensor Fidei, Defender of the Faith, which is still a title of the British monarch. But he also knew how to engage the common people and to talk like them with their accent. Londoners had called the nickname for him Bluff Prince Hall, the plain-spoken prince. Bluff Prince Hall. This popularity started after the death of his brother Arthur, Prince of Wales and heir to the throne of Henry VII. After the Battle of Bosworth Field, Henry VII married Elizabeth of York, niece of Richard III, who died in the Battle of Bosworth Field, and quickly after this eliminated the remaining partisans of the Yorkist Rose, if you like, as we saw in the previous episodes. After this conscientious massacre, Henry VII set himself to consolidate the power of the crown with an astute choice of alliances. For example, the Infanta of Spain, Catherine of Aragon, was a strategically excellent choice, as it tied the crown of England with the most powerful European state of the time, Spain. She was the daughter of King Ferdinand II of Aragon and of Isabel of Castile, the one who financed Christopher Columbus for his famous or infamous expedition to the Indies. Arthur and Catherine were engaged when they were still small children, and married when they just became adolescent. But Arthur died in 1502 when he was only 16, and immediately a request was made to the Pope, who at the time was Julius II, to grant a dispensation and allow marriage with a sister-in-law. The Pope was Pius III, who gave the dispensation. The marriage took place in 1509 because when the dispensation arrived, Henry was only 12 years old, and it was to be the longest of Henry VIII's 6 marriages. It lasted 18 years. The beginning of the marriage was auspicious. A child was born in 1511 with great festivities in the realm, but he died after only 1 month. And the subsequent offspring of only Mary, of the next deliveries, only Mary, born in 1516, survived. She was to become Queen of England from 1553 to 1558, the year of her death. She was also to become remembered as the Bloody Mary due to her executions of Protestants. But back to Henry VIII, who in the full of his strength saw near him Catherine, so now a woman in poor health and prematurely aged. Therefore he began to think about the future of the kingdom. Already England had defeated an invasion from Scotland, and then he tried to reconquer France, starting from Calais, a project later abandoned. And meanwhile, Henry skillfully managed to maintain good relations with both King Francis I of France and Emperor Charles V of Spain, the two great European powers of the time. Some historians have said that Henry was a good judge of men, having chosen Cardinal Wolsey as Chancellor, but a poor estimator of women. Now, Anne Boleyn was 20 years old in 1526, when Henry was 35. She was one of the Queen's maids of honor, and she was witty, she was charming, and she was beautiful. But, contrary to the expectations of the time, she responded only cautiously and reservedly to the king's advances. Unused to find obstacles on his path, Henry convinced himself that Anne was indispensable to him. Anne, on the other hand, did not realize the dangers she was exposing herself to. And the love letters from the king to Anne have survived. And here is an extract from one. "By turning over in my thoughts the content of your last letters, I have put myself into a great agony, not knowing how to understand them, whether to my disadvantage as I understand them, whether to my advantage as I understood some others, or not. I beseech you now, with the greatest earnestness, to let me know your whole intention as to the love between us two," and so on and so on. Now, Anne was keeping, as we would say today, Henry on tender hooks, and the besotted Henry started thinking about his first marriage. Perhaps the lack of a son was due to his having married the widow of his brother, therefore a kind of curse from heaven. He then dispatched Cardinal Wolsey to Rome to obtain an annulment from the Pope, who by this time was Clement VII. Now, it was fairly common for the Church to grant annulments, which is really a euphemism for divorce granted to noblemen and potentates. But here the situation was trickier. Catherine of Aragon was the aunt of Emperor Charles V, and he could not tolerate that Mary, the daughter of his aunt, could be declared illegitimate. Besides, the Pope was essentially his prisoner of Charles V. In 1527, the mostly Protestant troops of the Catholic Charles V sacked and ransacked Rome, an event remembered way after its occurrence. Bottom line, the negotiations were stretched through time. A Roman cardinal by the name of Cardinal Campeggio was sent to England to study the case, but the conclusion was no cigar, colloquially speaking. Cardinal Wolsey was dismissed. And the tension were rising, considering that though England was Catholic, a group of powerful ecclesiastics, priests, were considering with sympathy the Lutheran reforms and looked forward to becoming independent of the Pope's authority. Considering also that a rupture with Rome meant confiscating the considerable wealth of the Catholic Church, of the possession of the Catholic Church in England. What to do? He decided to pose the question of the annulment to the theologians, he meaning Henry VIII, the theologians of the English universities. And the author of this idea was actually the king's right man, Thomas Cranmer, an ecclesiastical politician, or we could say a politician posing as an ecclesiastic. Notwithstanding his vote of celibacy, he married in secret, and when he traveled, he brought his wife with him in a special trunk, equipped with openings to let the air in. In the meantime, the actual chancellors, Thomas More, one of the sharpest intellects of the Europe of the times, resigned, and his place was taken by another Thomas Cromwell, a skillful lawyer, indifferent to any religion but his interest. As expected, the English theologians annulled Henry's wedding with his first wife, and Henry married Anne Boleyn again in 1533. The Pope proceeded to excommunicate the king, and so began the schism between the Anglican and the Catholic Church. The repulsed Catherine was segregated into the castle of Kimbleton. Before flying away, she sent the king a letter forgiving him. And chronicles of the time said that he cried on reading the letter when he received it, and he was probably sincere. Meanwhile, Cranmer pulled his wife out of the trunk, and had himself nominated Archbishop of Canterbury. Latimer redacted the new Articles of the Church of England, Cardinal Latimer that is, whereby the king was the supreme chief of the church, which he continued to call Catholic. In fact, of all the Protestant sects and denominations, we could say that the Church of England, ceremonies-wise, is the most Catholic. Meantime, Anne Boleyn gave birth to a daughter, Elizabeth, a disappointment for the king, but as you know later, Elizabeth I played an important, monumental role in the establishment of England as one of the world powers, leading to a great part of the world being colored in pink as in the old atlases. And as you know, the position as a supreme world power of England was only lost after World War II. After that, Anne had a stillbirth, and meanwhile, Henry had a bad hunting accident, when a boar wounded him after making him fall from a horse. That wound would never heal. And meantime, the fortunes of Anne Boleyn were falling rapidly. It was rumored that she had 2 lovers among the court aristocrats, plus a music teacher as another lover. Custom prevented aristocrats to be tortured, but the music master by the name of Smeaton was tortured, and he admitted to everything. The queen was condemned. Satisfying her last wish, the king summoned an executioner from France, famous for being skilled at his job, considering that the guillotine had not yet been invented. The axe was kept hidden under some straw until the last moment, and Elizabeth's most affectionate maid of honor, Mary Wyatt, collected head and body and asked a passing bowman for help. The bowman brought down an old trunk used to store arrows. Anne's head and body were put in the trunk and carried away without any ceremony for a quick burial. 10 days later, Henry, dressed in white, married his third wife, Jane Seymour, sister of Admiral Thomas Seymour, considered a heartthrob among the London ladies of the time. A year later, finally, a male child was born, the future Edward VI, but his birth cost Jane Seymour her life. All that remains of her is a portrait by the same Hans Holbein who painted the famous portrait of Henry VIII. For 2 years, Henry remained unmarried, which was a record for him. But the political situation was becoming complicated. The king obstinately hung to the Catholic rites and resented the extremism of the extreme Protestants. At this point, Chancellor Cromwell suggested a new marriage, and the noble Flemish family of Cleves-Hainault had 2 marriageable girls, Anna and Amelia. The Flemish were Lutherans, so there was no hidden danger of a return to Catholicism from that side. And the court painter, who was German, Hans Holbein, was dispatched was dispatched to Cleves with the objective of painting the two princesses, out of whom Henry would choose the one he liked. Henry chose Anne of Cleves, and they were married long distance, and he went to meet her once she had landed in England. This time the court painter, we could say, overdid it. Henry liked the ladies who were slim, fragile, and sexy, as the first Anne Boleyn had been. But Anne of Cleves, instead, apparently, was a big girl. She was clumsy, only knew some words of English, and had been raised to consider dancing, music, and poetry as the instruments and the arts of the devil. The king decided on the spot that he would never live with what he called the great Flemish mare, as he called her. And perhaps the painter Holbein, who was German, thought Anne of Cleves as being beautiful. However, he found himself in a tight spot, as you can imagine, and therefore for a while he thought it prudent to let himself not be seen at court. The ambitious Chancellor Cromwell ended up in the Tower of London and was decapitated shortly afterwards. Now, in the play Henry VIII, Shakespeare has the dying Cardinal Wolsey saying to his successor, Cromwell, I charge thee, fling away ambition, by that sin fell the angels. Clearly, being married or being a prime minister to Henry VIII was a dangerous undertaking. But Anne of Cleves fared better. She did not complain, did not threaten diplomatic fractures or similar, and happy perhaps of her docility, Henry gave her a good pension and a beautiful castle of Richmond to reside in. Anne of Cleves was content to watch from afar and as a spectator the dramas unfolding at the London court, after having been herself a protagonist. And now we come to the fifth act of the drama of Henry VIII, or tragedy, if you like, depending on your point of view. It was a long-drawn drama indeed, for even Shakespeare only included the first two wives, Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn, in his play, by the name of Henry VIII, and he prudently stopped the play at the point when Elizabeth was born. Henry VIII now set his eye on the 17-year-old Catherine Howard, though I don't know about you, but it seems difficult, from the paintings or miniatures, to establish the relative degree of beauty among the harem, if you like, of Henry VIII. Catherine Howard was an orphan belonging to the cadet branch of the Catholic Dukes of Norfolk. She had Plantagenet blood in her veins and had lived the life of the poor relative. Her ward, which was the old Duchess of Norfolk, was pleased when Catherine was assumed as maid of honor for the new queen, Anne of Cleves, who, as we saw, was never queen at all, apart from the fact that the marriage was never consummated. Henry, who was now 49 years old, had what we could call today a middle-aged crush for Catherine. Never mind that he was now grossly overweight, as Holbein's painting confirms. He no longer played tennis, could hardly get on a horse, and his large tummy literally overflowed from the rich attire embroidered with silk and with gold. Henry thought or imagined that in Catherine Howard he would rediscover his lost youth. After all, it was the renewal of a previous plot, and the characters, the queen and the maid of honor, only the names were exchanged. Now Anne of Cleves was, or had been, the queen, and Catherine was the maid of honor. But that young queen had a troublesome past to deal with. She had had little supervision in her youth, or in her early youth. The story goes that Catherine was influenced by some older girls who candidly allowed men in the sleeping areas at night for entertainment, and the girls were rewarded with food and wine and gifts. Catherine was not as well as educated as some of Henry's other wives, although her self-taught ability to read and write was impressive enough at the time. Her character has often been described as vivacious, giggly, and brisk, but she displayed also a great interest in dancing lessons, but often would go off track. from the lesson and instead making jokes. At least 2 men had abused her when she was an adolescent, so say the chronicles, including the inevitable music teacher, inevitable during those times, by the name this time of Henry Manox. And she had exchanged secret marriage vows with the secretary to her grandmother by the name of Frances Derham. The accepted version goes that in order to buy her lover's silence, she obtained employment for them at court. But soon rumors began to circulate, enriched with not necessarily credible, piquant details. Shakespeare makes rumor speak at the beginning of one of his plays and says, "Upon my tongue continual slanders ride, the which in every language I pronounce, stuffing the ears of men with false reports." Catherine denied all accusations and asked for pity. But, as with Anne Boleyn, the plot repeated itself almost identically. She was led through the Traitor's Gate into the Tower of London, where she was executed less than 2 years after her marriage. The heads of her lovers were already rotting on the top of poles on the bridge of the tower. If you did not know the story already, you may think that by now Henry VIII would have had enough of marriages. Instead, he married again. What we would call today, he married a lady by the name of Catherine Parr. She was already the widow of 2 husbands, kind of 16th century Mrs. Simpsons, if you like. She was described as practical, with a positive attitude, and not afraid of headless ghosts, which no doubt roamed through the English court at night. She escaped the beheading, though it is said to have come close to it. For her second husband had been Lord Latimer, who had filled Catherine's head with Protestant doctrines. Now, during the long hours that Henry spent in his bed, because his health was progressively failing, King and Queen were heard engaging in loud debates, and Henry found Catherine a bit too much of a heretic, at least the chronicles say. The king lived another 2 years. Meanwhile, more heads were being chopped throughout the realm, mainly due to the still burning conflict between the Catholic and Protestant currents. When Henry died in 1547, he left the throne to the 10-year-old Edward, who was born when Henry's third wife, Jane Seymour, died soon after delivery, as we found before. Now, who were the survivors among the 6 wives? Catherine Parr, the 6th wife, did. In fact, not too much time went before Catherine Parr married again for the 4th time. And who was the groom this time? Nevertheless, than Admiral Tom Seymour, considered one of the sexiest men in London. Ladies watching this program may decide for themselves whether Tom Seymour deserves the title. Catherine Parr died at Sudley Castle in Gloucestershire, among the beautiful Cotswold Hills. Her tomb is inside the church, which is part of the Sudley Castle estate. And the second surviving wife was the repudiate Flemish mayor, as he called her, Anne of Cleves. She was actually free to return to her home country, but nevertheless she decided to remain in England, to which she became accustomed. Of course, we could say that with a good pension and a resident castle like that, it would seem foolish to let it all go. But, as Shakespeare would say, the web of life is of a mingled yarn. Good and ill go together. Catherine Parr lived until 1557, when the king, or rather the Queen of England, they had changed their mind about allowing a woman to be queen, when the Queen of England was Mary the Catholic, the daughter of the first of Henry VIII's wives, Catherine of Aragon. The daughter was Mary. This happened because the son of Henry VIII and Jane Seymour died young in 1553. Mary restored for a while the Catholic Church, and as I said before, went down in history as the Bloody Mary. During her reign, over 280 religious dissenters were burned at the stake, and Mary herself died of illness in 1558 at the age of 42. Elizabeth, the daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, became queen and restored Protestantism of the Church, restored the Protestantism rather, of the Church of England with its attendant independence from Rome. In our sketch here, we have omitted to delve into the issues of power, politics, and intrigue that form an important background to the events, as well as with the many marriages of Henry VIII. We also did not cover the imperial conflict involving England, Spain, and France, the conflict between Catholicism and Protestantism, which in turn involved the more profound sociological question whether the spiritual life of an individual should be the purview of the Pope or the purview of the individual. Nevertheless, the people who so much loved Henry when he was young did not regret his end. Perhaps so many cruel events may have reminded the people that Henry, on the side of his mother, was a Plantagenet, and popular belief said that all the Plantagenets descended from the devil, and to the devil they were bound to return. Thank you for watching. Thank you, our crew, in particular Kat Iverson, for her technical direction and skills. Until next time, I am Jimmy Molia for Historical Sketches. Good night.